Thank you so much, Marta. I appreciate it. I want to first of all thank Rebecca for inviting me and my team to the Edge Data Center Working Group. We met out at ConnectX in May, and we're super excited to be involved. My team is on the call. I think they all introduced themselves. Jim Cohen, Carlton Griffiths, Mario Conti, my team of engineers and the brains behind Immersion Edge. So we also, I think that also we've invited Lenovo, Scott Carter and Susan Hedberg to the call. I know they introduced themselves. We've been working with them very closely for the past year in regards to OEM equipment for immersion cooling. And so I'll just start off by saying liquid immersion cooling, of course, is not new. But the current state of technology has made us all take a second look, and data centers must be more energy efficient for the first time. But the time for liquid cooling has really arrived. We know that if you know anything about liquid cooling, you know it's proven itself in the past few years on the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency side. But we know it is primed for enterprise, hyperscale, and we honestly believe it is a true fit for edge data centers and to be on the edge. So with that, I'll just say, you can move on to slide 2 for me. So, and so of course, why immersion cooling? Of course, we all know air is a terrible heat conductor, and the dielectric coolant that we use is 1,200 times more efficient at dissipating heat than air. There's a lot of things and benefits to that, but the number one benefit would be that requires you to have a 90% savings in cooling power costs. It is, there's other things in regards to that we don't have to get into. I know I only have about 10 minutes, so so go on to the next slide. But it eliminates some of the most common data center problems. Of course, temperature swings, server fan failures, a lot of contaminants in the air, dust, corrosion, oxidation, noise, which is also a really big factor and considered a problem in a lot of data centers, I know. It also eliminates completely eliminates the need for server fans, and heard this a really interesting fact that the fans themselves are 10 to 20% of the energy for a server. And so when you eliminate that, you're also eliminating the number one failing component, not to mention the energy that it requires for the fans. So the fact that we remove the fans, you start you start chipping away at the energy right away just by doing that. So I'm going to the next slide. There'll be a time for questions at the end of this, by the way, so I know I'm going to cover a lot of really, top stuff, but if you want to ask a question, go ahead. Otherwise, I was going to open it up at the end. So also, not only the reduction in the cooling, but also the power and other elements of the infrastructure, which there's no need for raised floor, there's no need for air handlers. You can remove a lot of the computer room air conditioning, if not all. You don't have to worry about the cold aisle, hot aisle issue. One really large factor we feel has to do a lot with the edge data center application is there's no need for chemical fire suppression systems. You have a reduction in your critical power infrastructure due to the removal of fans, because your overall reduction is 60% in power and infrastructure, and that is really huge, especially seeing how we are trying to make data centers more energy efficient now, and of course that's an oxymoron in itself. But you've got increased server density and more power in less space. So all of these things are, keep coming back and speaking to the benefits of immersion cooling, and then specifically why it's a good fit for the edge. So you can go on to the next slide. So there are two types of immersion cooling. There is single phase and two phase. We use a single phase dielectric fluid, proprietary fluid, but a lot of you may have heard of two phase. Two phase immersion cooling uses a special dielectric fluid as well, and evaporates at low temperatures, but this liquid has a lot of advantages and disadvantages. And there's some white papers, and we can get you information if you want to, but the liquid itself is less viscous than single phase dielectric and has a slightly superior heat transfer capabilities. But again, those things actually come at a cost. And if you go on to the next slide, the two phase is much more expensive, if you can see, compared to the single phase. You also, when you perform a maintenance, you have to turn off equipment, or go ahead and let that very expensive liquid evaporate. With single phase, the maintenance can be performed while the system is operational. Two phase also leaves a lot of residue, and the single phase dielectric does not leave any residues. Of course, conspiracy theorists, but there is a lot of information out there, and in fact, the Department of Energy has several white papers on their website, and there's a lot of possible health issues. Even in an unmanned type of situation, you still have to have the equipment, maintenance and worked on, and there's a lot of inhalation of the dielectric in the two phase. There's a lot of things out there that is not on the positive side for that, whereas the single phase dielectric, not only does it not evaporate, it's biodegradable and non-toxic. So also in the two phase, there's some expense. You have to make it airtight, so that's expensive in itself, whereas the single phase, an airtight container is not required. So go on to the next one. So in fact, there's, again, going back to a couple white papers put out by the Department of Energy, and one of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. This is just, one of the documents that's on there. And the DoD had an installation, and actually the findings were two-phase immersion cooling is not viable at this time, unfortunately for them, but it was quite extensive paper. If you there's a link at the bottom there, and but if anybody wants me to send you a link, I'd be more happy to do that. So next. So obviously why we're all on the call is why immersion cooling is a solution for edge data centers. And go on to the next slide for me. We I don't know, and this might start a debate, but everything that we've seen by IEEE is talking about how the 5G design requirements specify that energy be reduced to 10% of the current 4G. And when I first read that, it was like 10% of the current 4G, not 10% less than the 4G, but 10% of the current 4G. And that's some pretty high design criteria for it to be that much more energy efficient. Of course, the network equipment needs to absorb a lot of that, but cooling needs to do its part. And we feel that the immersion cooling is primed to help some of that energy efficient need in require that's being required, especially on the edge. So, and that there's a note there on the bottom there. So the operational efficiency, we have PUEs and from our data center as low as 1.05. A lot of this is comes from several different areas. The ability to remove the fans from the computer equipment, as well as all of the other reasons that you can do a 50 to 60% energy savings right off the top, means that you're right there with the operational efficiency and energy efficiency in general. So you can go on to the next one. So again, we've covered a couple of things already in the electrical. You have 10 to 25% reduction in the critical and electrical infrastructure with your UPSs, your PDUs, the DC power distribution, and they don't need to be sized to accommodate for server fans. Again, 60% reduction in non-critical electrical infrastructure with your generators, transfer switch. So everything starts chipping down, and so if it's in an existing site, the capability to maximize your current infrastructure is important. So all these higher densities translate into smaller footprints, and so we have up to 100 kW per tank, and that space savings equates to a savings as high as 80%. So the reduction of the electrical infrastructure and major downsizing of your HVAC equipment allows additional savings of up to 40%. So if you see why all of this kind of starts to make the moment where we understand that this is a really great application, maybe not for all edge data centers, but for at least a portion of edge data center applications for sure. So on to the next one. So higher densities allow for more compute power and less space. I know that there's a lot to that, but the Midas XCI Immersion Cooling Data Center can be up to 60% smaller than a traditional air-cooled data center. So next slide. So of course CapEx, we have 51% savings on your infrastructure cost, and just again starting to chip away, and I'm sure there's going to be questions, but even if you're going to update outdated cooling equipment, the increased efficiency allows for smaller electrical infrastructure, as well as savings on planning, engineering, space requirements, just the whole thing in general. So next one. So not all immersion cooling is created equal. Our Midas XCI technology is patented since 2011, and so what we do is uniformly circulated throughout the tank to prevent heat layering. The dielectric is uniformly injected through the bottom and removed from the top. Proprietary smart continuous flow control system, and real-time temperature control and data logging, and that's really important. We work with Modius, and that is a great product for that. So go on. So we have 6 quick disconnects allowing the cooling modules to be replaced less than 10 minutes. The modules are in a redundant system and can be replaced while other modules provide cooling. So the system remains redundancy even during scheduled or unscheduled maintenances. So next one. And of course, we have other solutions just besides the tanks. We can provide immersion cooling solutions in an existing data center, or we can design and build the most energy efficient data center on the market. We have containerized solutions up to 2 megawatt. Again, I spoke a little earlier about Lenovo, and the big question is, warranties on equipment. And so we're just very pleased to be working with both Dell and Lenovo, but Lenovo in particular on specific OEM equipment to go into our systems, to go and be able to be put in the dielectric and still have complete factory warranties with them. So that was an exciting turning point for immersion cooling. One of the last hurdle that had to be taken care of, and we're really thrilled about that. So glad to have them on the call as well. So we have, of course, a couple different products, and talked about the containerized data center already. There's a specific, the Midas XCI for crypto, and I know again that is, as much as there's possibly negative or positive about crypto, it has been what has shown that immersion cooling works. It works exactly the way it says it works. And but then we have, of course, the Midas XCI V5, and for that's like tier 3 and 4, and then the XCI V4, which is more for tier 3 and 2. So as well as a 12U container for the edge. So lastly, I'll say, I had mentioned the Department of Energy and their quotes. But there's another white paper on the Department of Energy's website, and it was written by Mr. Dale Sartor. I actually have had the honor of meeting him and speaking with him many times, and so he wrote that actually in conjunction with the China's Green Data Center Bilateral Working Group. And the quote is, once heat load per standard unit in the 19-inch rack reaches around 500 watt, liquid cooling will become popular. Liquid cooling would become widely accepted cooling method with a considerable market share. And once heat load per standard equipment reaches around 1,000 watts, liquid cooling will become the primary cooling method or even the sole method. And I know that's going to be a little bit of opening for debate, but we understand that there's going to be a certain point where that is where we know we're there now. And so really thrilled that he actually said that, and had a chance to chat with him about that. But I can send you that white paper as well if you're interested. So, and I think that's it. Yeah. Hey, no problem. I can't believe I went over 15 minutes. No, I'm sorry. No, and if you have any questions, maybe we can bring it for another time. You can email us at, sales at Immersion Edge. And if I don't have time for any questions, I do appreciate y'all's time though.